we have a few minutes. So at the federal level, there are kind of three different areas that we're interested in. Obviously, reauthorization is the big one, with the FAST Act expiring at the end of September. So that's one area that we want to ask Congressman Stauber about. And with the House passing the Invest in America Act, which was kind of rolled into the moving forward $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan. The question now is, you know, how will the House and Senate get together on this and actually get a final bill passed? The other thing that's happening right now this week is the federal fiscal year 2021 appropriations bills are being passed. And this morning, the Transportation and Housing and Urban Development Appropriations Bill was passed in subcommittee. So that's another big issue. And then, of course, if there will be another stimulus package related to COVID-19 relief, and if there will be any funding for transportation in that, as we are, you know, trying to get additional funding. AASHTO has been asking for an additional $50 billion for all the state DOTs. So that's another topic that we want to try and cover. So, okay, we have Representative Urdahl, who's joined us.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. Well, we seem to be having a little trouble with the Congressman's connection. He hasn't joined us yet. So I'm just wondering, since you're on, if maybe we could start with you and maybe change the order up a little bit. And
that's fine.
Okay, great. So for everybody who's participating, Representative Dean Urdahl is the ranking member on the House Capital Investment Committee in Minnesota and used to be the chair of the committee. So he has a lot of experience with putting together bonding bills. And of course, we're all real anxious about, you know, what's happening with the special session that will be happening on Monday. And since we were hoping for a bonding bill with the last special session, if there's more hope this time that there will be a deal. And specifically what you see in terms of funding for roads, bridges, transit, all those transportation programs.
Well, first of all, you know, thank you for inviting me to visit with you a little bit today. It's been 16 years on bonding, 16 of my 18 years. There was a couple years when Dorman was the chair that I took a break, but found that you know, the Capital Investment Committee is a very important committee, especially, well, either way, in the majority or in the minority. It's one of those areas where minority members can have an impact on legislation, which is why I like to be on it. I think I'll answer, first of all, the question of what's going on right now. By the way, I'm getting an echo on myself. Am my sound all right for you?
Yeah, it sounds fine to us. Yeah.
Right then, I'll just ignore hearing me twice. But last time we were hoping that we could get things together, but it just didn't work out. I'll tell you what has been happening since then. Mary Murphy, the chair of the Capital Investment Committee, and I met several weeks ago now to try to put together a House package that we felt could pass the House of Representatives if we needed it. And we did that. We put together a bill at $1.1 billion. And I think it was a good, fair bill. And that bill then was negotiated with the Senate, with Senator Senjum, by Representative Murphy. I was in phone consultation on that round. And they are very close to having things done in terms of the general obligation bonds. And I know that the embargoed copy of that has been circulating out there. Probably several of your members have looked at it by now. But it is, as of last night, again, very close to tying the bows on as far as the general obligation portion of it is concerned. There are other portions of the bill that still need to be addressed and may be on a level a little bit higher than a committee chair or committee lead. And it could be that leadership has to get together and decide what's going to happen with the trunk highway bonds, appropriation bonds, the policy language. Is there going to be any cash, and how is that going to be divided? Certainly, I have been, and others will be making suggestions to the leadership in the event that they are moving on to that portion of the negotiations. But let me, I can maybe come back to it again, but give you a little bit more as to what we've been thinking or doing. In the bill that, and what I'm talking about is what has been put together by Senator Senjum and by Representative Murphy and to a lesser degree myself, over 300 million for roads, bridges, airports, ports, and commercial rail. We have focused on development of transportation infrastructure that will be tied to future economic and commercial development as Minnesota bounces back from COVID-19. We have new funding dedicated for township roads above and beyond the existing local road improvement program. So right now, I think that's 8 million township roads and roughly 70 to 80 million in local roads. We still need to address the trunk highway bonds. And we also have funding for bus rapid transit in the metro area and for greater Minnesota transit development. Coming back to the trunk highway bonds, where we are with that. Earlier, the Senate had proposed about $400 million in trunk highway bonds. Now, this gave some consternation to various folks. I think Commissioner Anderson Kelleher, the governor, maybe to some extent. But anyway, we have a limit, as you know, with trunk highway bonding and how much can be bonded for. 20% is the ceiling. And we were looking to come up close to that with trunk highway bonds. I think the governor was at 172. Again, the Senate at 400 million. The governor largely without earmarks. The Senate likes earmarks in their highway projects. And this was again causing some more problems. And so I know that the Senate has come down. The governor and the commissioner have come up a little bit, but still a lot of questions remain and what is going to happen with the trunk highway bonds. If we were just doing a bill with GO bonds, I think it could be wrapped up very soon, today or tomorrow. But there are these other components that are going to have to be addressed. I don't know what is going to be worked out with the trunk highway bonds. But once that happens, I think the other things will fall into place fairly quickly. We do have the other, I guess, I don't know what I want to call them. I'll just say issues out there that are impacting the bonding bill. And that, of course, are some requests that Leader Dowd has made of the governor regarding his emergency powers. I think there are also some concerns that we'd like to see as far as changes in the tax bill that would help get the bonding bill moving. And then, of course, we also have from the posse caucus issues dealing with law enforcement. Those are also having to be worked through. So, I mean, we have executive power issues. We have issues with the police reform and issues with taxes, and all of these things in some ways impacting when and how we do the bonding bill. So I'm hopeful that all of this falls together in fairly short order. Can I promise you that we're going to have a bonding bill next Monday? No, I can't. There was a hope that we could finish up today with bonding, but I don't think that the negotiations that I've addressed have reached the point where we can reach a conclusion with bonding. So things could happen yet. Things could happen over the weekend. And maybe on Monday we do have a bonding bill. Maybe some of these other issues are taken care of, but we're just going to have to wait and see what happens on that. So that is kind of what I have. Oh, I should say, I'll just say on local bridges, we have about 82 million. And, again, these figures that I'm saying, still are in a little bit of a state of flux. Nothing is in cement yet, but getting close. We do have 82 million in local bridges, but 52 million of that is the St. Paul Bridge that we have to get done as well. So with that, any questions or comments from folks?
Great. Thank you so much for that rundown. If you don't mind hanging out with us for a little bit and then getting to some questions a little later, we want to just make sure that Congressman Stauber can stay with us also. So
yeah.
You mean I have to listen to a congressman?
You are interested in hearing this anyway.
I'll gladly listen to the congressman.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you, Congressman Stauber, for joining us.
Yeah, you betcha. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and sorry about the technical issues. All of these different platforms get a little challenging, I know. But we're glad you're here, and we kind of have, for those, just to make sure everybody who's participating, and we have about 49 people, that Congressman Pete Stauber is from the 8th District. He serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which is great, from Minnesota. We really appreciate him being a champion for transportation. He's been to our Washington fly-in, and we're hoping to still go out to Washington in September on our fly-in.
Oh, good.
So we hope that we'll be able to do that. But there's kind of 3 main areas that we're interested in hearing from you about. The first one is, of course, reauthorization of the FAST Act, with that expiring at the end of September. We know the House passed a very big $1.5 trillion package that included the Invest in America Act, which is a 5-year surface transportation reauthorization. So that's one area. We'd like to hear what you think will happen now with the Senate, and if there's a chance to come up with a final reauthorization before the end of September. And then the other one is the fiscal 2021 appropriations bill for transportation and housing and urban development, the kind of THUD appropriations bill. The Appropriations Committee subcommittee voted on that this morning. and it looks like it has higher levels of funding than the 2020 appropriations bill, and including some emergency funding of $26 billion. And then the last thing is, if you think there will be another stimulus package that might include some additional funding for either highways or transit. We know that AASHTO's been asking for $50 billion for all the state DOTs because of the drop in fuel tax revenue, and transit is still looking for some additional funding. So if you want to take it away, we're really excited to hear what's happening in Washington.
Well, thank you very much, and I apologize for the technical issues. It happens, but Representative Urdahl, I appreciate your update from the state level too. It sounds familiar on kind of what's happening on the federal level. So just to start out with the reauthorization, let's talk about the Moving Forward Act, the HR 2 Act, just under or just over $1.5 trillion, and I believe it's going to end up going to conference because it was a partisan bill. 40% of it was for the Green New Deal initiatives, and it was very concerning that the Republicans didn't have any input, zero. In fact, I had an amendment that actually went through committee. It passed almost unanimously in committee. And Speaker Pelosi and Chairman DeFazio decided to take it out, quietly take it out. And that was the no child labor for elected charging. Really good amendment, partisan support, 44-19. And the Speaker decided to take that out herself. And my former colleague, Congressman Nolan, we talked about this. Washington, D.C. has to get back to regular order, and committee work has to mean something. This is Pelosi's My Way or the Highway bill, and it's unfortunate. It did pass the House, and we're counting on the Senate to come to conference on some of these issues. And I think that it's not how our nation, it's not how we're supposed to work in Congress. I'm seeing the amendments like mine that are very reasonable, supported in committee, where just the chairman and the speaker take them out. To me, that's unacceptable. And I will just say that having been the transportation chair geographically, one of the biggest counties in our state, St. Louis County, it's a big, important issue. Representative Urdahl just mentioned something about bridge bonding. I think he said 82 million or maybe 52 million, where the vast majority went to one bridge in the metro. I have to tell you that there's enough members on both sides of the aisle that have had it with rural America and our roads and bridges in the rural communities taking the back seat to the metro. And that's what I'm trying to do on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Chairman Oberstar, the more I look into what he did and what he championed in a bipartisan fashion, we have to get back to that regular order, not only in the T&I, but all the committees across this nation. The partisanship, for those of you it's palpable for those of you who are on with us today, and that's unacceptable. We can do better. And so, to have 40% of the monies on the Green New Deal that we know that in much of rural America will be devastating, and I know it will be devastating for those of us living in the northern climates. And it's not what I wanted to report today, but I think in conference they're going to come to some type of resolution. I think that we both sides can agree with, as Representative Urdahl is working with down in St. Paul, a similar situation. Fiscal year appropriations. I want to, I'm not an appropriator, but remember, all the bills start out of the House. The funding comes out of the House, and I think that those that committee work that they're doing right now in our nation's capital is extremely important to invest in our roads and bridges. And I'll share this with you on the Transportation Committee. I've said it several times publicly. Because we're divided as a nation, let's look at where we can come together. And since this is transportation, I like to look at it. Let's legislate in between the guardrails. There's a left ditch and there's a right ditch. And when you travel in the ditches, you all know you don't go very far. So let's bring that legislation, the conversation in between the guardrails and move America forward and move Minnesota forward. And you are all experts in your respective fields. You're doing great work. I've said this to you all, Margaret, you'll agree with this, and it comes from Congressman Oberstar. I'm going to attribute this to him. There's not a Democrat road or a Republican road. The road's for us all. And it seems the divisiveness in Washington has to change. And that's one of the things the Problem Solvers Caucus is doing, working on all these bills to understand that, take the partisanship away and let's focus on, and I've said this, roads and bridges and rural broadband. If we can invest in roads and bridges and rural broadband, including our water projects, our water projects, those are things that are in the guardrails. That's legislating within the guardrails. And we need to have a focus at rural America and those roads that many of the metro people use, like this time of year in northern Minnesota. Our rural roads are used by metro residents for their cabins and recreation in the great state of Minnesota. And for those of you who are up in the northern part, you understand. And we get outstate travelers too. But it's not the message I want to deliver, but I will deliver this. I believe legislation is the art of the possible, and I'm not done working. Every single day I'm working not only with the problem solvers but the other members of both sides of the aisle to make sure that legislation, common sense, pragmatic, and can actually get signed into law. I'm not interested in messaging bills. That's an exercise in futility in my mind. Let's get things that can get across the finish line. Now, another stimulus package, I think that it is, there's going to be an opportunity for us to discuss that. I will share with you that the $841 million that was put in, that was in the stimulus package after the governor gave Hennepin and Ramsey their money, we want to see how that is distributed and see where the investments are needed after it's distributed. So my wish was the governor would have distributed 11 weeks ago, so we could dial up and invest in those areas of shortcoming and try to get us to pre-pandemic levels. You know, we're in extraordinary times, and it's going to take extraordinary measures to get us back to where we were just several months ago. And I think we can do that, but it's going to take an investment. And our transportation and infrastructure is an extremely important committee to invest in, and I'm on board doing it. I just don't like to be shut out. The 8th District of Minnesota was literally shut out of that just under $1.6 trillion purely political partisan Nancy Pelosi bill. And I think that hopefully the Moving Forward Act will get into conference, or we will be able to add some amendments at this time. For those of you who are part of understand the process in Washington, you'll see that Sam Graves basically begged Chairman DeFazio, let us have a partisan bill and work together. This is what America wants and America's asking for, and it just didn't happen. And I will say this, it happens on both sides of the aisle. You've all seen that, and I'm one not to let that happen. Our roads and bridges, our infrastructure is too important to put partisan party politics. And I'm working every single day to make sure that the surface transportation bill is funded. And I'm open to all kinds of ideas and suggestions to do that, because I believe it's our opportunity. It's our obligation to fix our roads and bridges that the greatest generation did some 55, 60 years ago. It's time. And so that's kind of where I stand, and our office stands ready to help and ready to make those common sense, pragmatic investments into our infrastructure, including both major political parties. And I think that Representative Urdahl he put it very gently to the listeners here. and we can do better. We have to put pressure on ourselves to do better. Take the party labels off, and that's what I feel. But it is the art of the possible. I believe legislation is the art of the possible, and myself and our staff are not standing by. We're reaching out every single day to legislators, to influential people in the T&I committee and around the conference on both sides. Let's move something forward that makes sense, that can get signed into law. And little bit by little bit, we're moving that ball. But I'll tell you what, I understand what you all understand, the importance of the investment in our infrastructure and the importance of making sure that rural Minnesota has a strong voice and doesn't take a back seat to anybody. And I talked about, Representative Urdahl just brought about the bridge, the bonding. It's always like, as a St. Louis County commissioner, and by the way, I am very proud of St. Louis County, of what we've done. And I want to tell you something that you all, I'm very proud of the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Professional, pushing things forward the right way, and I'm proud to be associated with our great state and getting things done in a bipartisan way, the best we can, and using the ingenuity that we've given, the best practices. And I tell you what, and I'll say this again, I'm very proud of St. Louis County, what we've done, what we've learned to do. Now, let's make sure that all 87 counties in our great state have a seat at the table. And the 18 in the 8th Congressional District, you can count on me to advocate for your needs. And I think that you can count on the other reps in the other 7 districts as well, because it's that important. Minnesota doesn't take a backseat to anyone, I'll tell you that much right now. So, okay, now I got to go take my blood pressure medication. It's the art of the possible and getting back to regular order, and we will do that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. We do have a few questions from folks.
Margaret, could I throw in a couple things first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, first of all, I enjoyed listening to Congressman Stauber. I think he made some very good points, and I appreciate the type of work he's trying to do in Washington. But just touching on a few things. First of all, regarding partisanship, capital investment in many ways is one of the least partisan committees because by its nature, it has to be bipartisan to pass unless there's a supermajority. So the Democrats have to have Republican votes or they can't pass a bill. And if it doesn't pass the House, we don't have a bill at all. So that's why we by the nature of this, we have to work together. Regarding the bridge, when I was chair in 2017, we actually for a time had both the Minneapolis and the St. Paul bridges in the bill. And it was a lot of money, but I made a commitment that we were going to take care of 2 bridges that really were facing some critical needs. Then an agreement was reached whereby the St. Paul bridge was moved to the next year at actually Chair Hausman's former Chair Hausman's suggestion. So the plan was do the Minneapolis bridge in 2017, do the St. Paul bridge in 2018, but in the intervening time, St. Paul changed their mind and made the Civic Center ramp the #1 project, lost their matching fund for the bridge, so we couldn't do the bridge in 2018. But I had made a promise, I had made a commitment, and so even in the minority, I advocated that we still need to do that bridge. And that's why it's there and why it's a bigger chunk. We can do a lot of rural Minnesota bridges with the 30 million that we have. Most of those are $1 million, $2 million type projects or less. So we'll still get a lot done in greater Minnesota. And in terms of the whole bill, it's, I think, quite well balanced as far as taking care of the needs of greater Minnesota as well as the metro area. And very heavy on infrastructure as a total bill. One comment, though, that Congressman Stauber talking about ditches and stay out of the right ditch, stay out of the left ditch. I traveled in Kenya for 2 weeks, and I want you to know it was easier driving in the ditches.
Okay. Representative Urdahl, point well taken. Point well taken. And to your, I just, before we take questions, Representative, what I was getting at is and I'll just say a bridge in St. Louis County, for example, that needed heavier weight limits, where transportation trucks had to, use the fuel to go 26 miles around when we know that we could upgrade this bridge and what have you. So I know you understand, and I hope please don't take this, my comments as a shot at the work you're doing. I get it. I understand it. But what I was saying is there were times when we had to, in greater Minnesota, split 15, 20 million, and we're all trying to fight for that pie. And I hope that you understand, at the time as a county commissioner, we're parochial, right? I'm fighting for St. Louis County. Now I'm fighting for the 8th Congressional District and the entire state of Minnesota with my other 7 reps. We're fighting along with 50 other states for what we believe is right. And if I may, you brought up earmarks. Listen, when we have a project in our state of Minnesota that we want to advocate for, I want to put my name on it. And I want to say, this is the investment that we need in the state of Minnesota. You can call it an earmark or whatever, but I want to be at the table, at the appropriations table, with my 7 other colleagues and our 2 U.S. senators saying, this is the most important thing for Minnesota. Because I don't want an appropriator that isn't familiar with our great state to make the decision on our behalf for 2 years or 5 years. I want to be at the table saying, this particular road or this particular fix is important to us in Minnesota. I'm not going to leave it just to the appropriators or a bureaucrat in the back room just checking the box. I'm not going to do that. I was elected to protect the people and take care of the roads, the bridges, the best way possible, and that's what we're going to do. And I think that, Representative, I will say that you've done a fantastic job. I want to be able to, with my 7 other colleagues and our 2 senators, to make sure Minnesota is at the table for that federal investment, because I know we have the experience, I know we have the workforce, and I will say that these projects that are major projects, we have to have a seat at the table to say, yeah, in Minnesota we agree, or MnDOT and the local communities agree, this is the bridge or this is the intersection that is the most important, or the top 5. And you all know about the can of worms up in Duluth. That is extremely important economic project for our community that we're going to continue to advocate for. MnDOT has been a great job working with the cities and the counties and township, working with the state of Wisconsin, because the bridge comes right over there. So I'll just leave it at that, and I'll yield back, take questions.
Well, thank you. I did want to just add too that thanks to your efforts to get some federal bridge money in your part of the state, that is, part of why we need more funding in the bonding bill for local bridges, is to come up with a match for that. Matching federal funds is a really important part of the local bridge program. So we always, want to make sure legislators at the state level understand that state bonds leverage federal funds, local funds, and that gets a lot more projects done. So thank you for, all that work. And we do have a question about, speaking of earmarks, I guess, a question about Highway 23. There is a big coalition there. They've made progress in getting expansion of Highway 23, but there's still more work to be done, and they're just wondering if you think there's a chance of getting funding in that corridor.
Which of us are you talking to?
Oh, to Congressman Stauber. Yeah. Highway 23 from Marshall into the Twin Cities. So from I-35 to I-90 is specifically the question.
I think that Mark, it's possible.
we lost him. Okay, sorry about that. So I guess we'll go back to the bonding bill issue. So another question, oh, he's back. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I'm back, Margaret. Can you hear me?
Okay,
yeah,
yep,
I'm back.
I can hear you
Can
now.
you hear me?
Yeah.
So one of the things that helps us out in funding is meeting with those of us on the T&I committee, like we have, and putting those projects front and center for the investment. And that's what I talked about. I want to help make these a priority. We have Highway 8, and we know that Highway 8's the highway of death. That's unfortunate, right? We know that when the local community supports it, right, from the township to the city to the county to Minda, we know that we can focus efforts investing there because we know that it's been vetted. And I think that so when specifically the 23, I'm saying yes, that is an important roadway that we want to put attention on. And so the art of the possible and the investment, I'm going to say yes, that it's the art of the possible to get that investment there is critically important. There's several major projects, I would say in outstate that are critically important for the safety. And I will say that we have the labor and the expertise to do it. And what better way to come out of this COVID than investing in the infrastructure? As Representative Urdahl talked about, it should be a bipartisan or a nonpartisan conversation to invest in the infrastructure, period. And so to the questioner, I'm saying yes, it's always the art of the possible.
Great. Well, and we know there are a number of highway corridor coalitions, and again, hopefully they'll be able to come out to Washington in September and talk more specifically about their projects. But
and Margaret, it matters. That right. Helps. The investment is together, right? When we can leverage federal, then we get local and state. It's a win-win.
Right. And I guess one of our big messages is to try, it's a challenge, but to try not to have a whole series of extensions of the FAST Act, because, we saw that with MAP 21, anywhere from 2 months to 6 months to 9 months, these constant extensions, and especially coming out of this COVID-19 damage to our economy, the last thing the construction industry needs is uncertainty. And not knowing, how long of an extension will we get.
No, Margaret, I mean, you can take it not only from the infrastructure look, but our small business look, etc. When the certainty isn't there, you're not going to get the investment, and you're not going to, for the most part, get our communities to invest because the certainty is not there. And we know when there's certainty, the investment, the attitude changes, and we can move forward. But I want to echo what you said. That certainty is extremely important, and I've heard that, and that's what we want to do to make sure that that investment is certain for many years.
It's the same thing with bonding. All of the projects aren't going to get done this summer or next year based on this bonding bill. But for entities to know that the money is there and it's available, right. That's very important to them in their planning.
Right. We have one question here about the bonding bill as far as, are all of the leaders being included, including Minority Leader Dowd, including the Senate Republican or Democrats, who are the minority on that side. Does it seem like there will be buy-in from all 4 caucuses on the bonding bill as you kind of hear the behind the scenes discussion? Does it seem like everybody's being involved?
Well, first of all, I think you're right. It's important that everyone is involved, all four leaders. And at this stage, again, particularly the Kurt Dowd, because as I said, a bill cannot pass the House at all unless it has Republican support. So with that in mind, it's important to include the minority leader. I think to some extent he has been, and I hate to be speaking for him because he knows how much he's been, and I'm not privy to all of his meeting times. But I do think that he maybe isn't being included in every meeting that they're having right now, and I would just advise that it is important to make sure that Leader Dowd is included.
Great.
Going forward.
Great. Okay, another question that we have has to do with protection of American jobs in rail. So this is for Representative Stauber, if you know or have any information on what's happening with some of the rail operations. And I know that's kind of tied into the whole reauthorization as well.
Yeah. No, the questioner probably knows that Rainier, Minnesota is the biggest crossing of rail between Minnesota or the United States and Canada, and we're working on making that easier. There's crews that change once they get into the United States. It's a good process. During this COVID process, it's been extremely difficult. Because some product leaves Canada, comes in through Rainier, and then back out to Sarnia and Toronto, Ontario. So there's things we have to work logistically during this COVID, but I think we're doing a good job. Listen, rail is a component, and Minnesota's 8th congressional district has every form of transportation and rail. We've got several Class 1 railroads that suit our needs, that are critically important in moving the product. So rail is very, very an important part of the conversation. I just want to speak locally, if I may. When I was commissioner in St. Louis County, we had good relations with our railroad with respect to the safety at the crossings. When they found a deficiency, we worked together, and we're still continuously doing that. The rail industry is like I say, part of that distribution component, and it will continue to be, for many years. And we want to be able to, like I say, put that common sense legislation that is fair, accurate, and reasonable, and getting the input from the experts on the rail industry and the number of crews and et cetera. So it is a part of the package. There's no question about it, especially up here, and especially the crossing at Rainier, busiest crossing between Canada and the United States in our district.
Thanks for that. So this is a question kind of for both of you, I guess, is, transit is also really important in Minnesota. Greater Minnesota Transit often doesn't get a lot of attention, even though they do have needs as well, both for bus garages in the bonding bill and, for just operations at the federal level. I'm just wondering what both of you see in terms of funding for transit across the state. And another important issue for folks here is volunteer drivers in Greater Minnesota. And the issue of the reimbursement rate at the federal level continues to be a problem. The 14 cents a mile that is still there in federal law. Just wondering for both of you what you're seeing in terms of transit funding.
Well, first of all, in the bonding bill, we do have the bus rapid transit money appropriated in the metro area. We also have bus funding for Greater Minnesota. Both those areas are being addressed. Regarding the reimbursement for drivers, I know that that's a big problem. I was made aware of it a couple of years ago, and thought at one point that we had it fixed. But I mean, volunteer drivers in this instance, it should not cost them money to volunteer. And so I think it's an important area that we need to get straightened out in the very near future.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that as well. First off, the transit is extremely important. The rural transit needs a lot of help, a lot of assistance. Those rural drivers, oftentimes those rural drivers are the only have the only ability or give the only ability for those seniors or others to stay in their rural homes, to get them to where they need to go. And there's definitely needs to be some changes. But on the federal level, I'm encouraged because that actual rural voice on rural transportation is starting to be heard, and I'm absolutely for it. Remember, transit, in particular, buses. Oftentimes, it's lower underserved communities, and that need that investment. And I'm one to have an open mind to make sure that public transportation has the ability to serve the people in the way they need to be served and in the region or area they need to be served. And that's something that we're discussing as as not only as a caucus, but on both sides of the aisle. There's no doubt about it. And I am signing on to a bill with Representative Peterson to increase that funding for rural drivers. It just makes all the sense in the world, and I think that that's those common sense, pragmatic pieces of legislation that should be a no-brainer to get. So Colin and I are working on that legislation to increase the funding for the volunteer drivers, the reimbursement.
Great, thank you so much for that. Another issue that we have a question about is the local road wetland replacement program in the bonding bill. We know that that's really important, and some of the wetland banks are empty currently. So just wondering if Representative Urdahl can tell us if there is funding, kind of what level of funding in the bonding bill for that program.
Yes, there is funding, and off the top of my head, I don't remember the amount, but I think it's in the range of around 20 million.
Oh, great. Yeah, I know the governor's recommendation was like 26 million. So
we recognize that that's a very important program, that the banks are running out of money if they haven't already, and so we are going to be funding it, I think, right around 20 million.
Great. Okay, well, I don't see any other, let me see, are there any other questions? There is a question about smaller railroads and the kind of the last mile of freight rail service to many small towns in greater Minnesota. So I guess just wondering if there's going to be funding for some of the short lines, as well as just making sure that some of the rail grade crossing issues also get taken care of.
There is the railroad grade separations. We are taking care of several of those, I believe. Some of it's trunk highway, so we're still waiting to see exactly where that money goes, but there will be some railroad grade separation. Particularly, I think we're looking at Moorhead and Red Wing and some others that are smaller. Then, as far as short lines, and again, any numbers that I give you don't chisel into stone anywhere. But Minnesota Valley, it's between $10-12 million for that. Mercy also, I think around $5 million. But that again still has to all be finalized. But we are looking at the short lines and trying to do something to address the needs that they have there too.
Great.
And from my standpoint, I'm on a bill already to extend the tax credit to the 45G tax credit for the short lines, which is extremely important to them.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we're getting close to 2 o'clock. So we really, again, want to thank you both so much for your leadership, for being a champion for transportation funding. And we're, wanting to know what we can do to be helpful too. And just want to really stress that we want to work with you to get legislation passed, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. And if you want to make any last minute comments, feel free.
If I could go before Representative Urdahl, I will just say that working together, and you, the experts in our state, have to help, push the agenda, and your advice from the boots on the ground help us with common sense legislation. And I just appreciate everything you all have done in the fly-ins. That's important to keep our staff, in my case, Jeff Bishop, aware of the things happening. If we're not on top of something, let us know. Let us know what you're hearing on the ground. That together we can help make that investment in our state. And so I'm all ears, and I just appreciate spending some time with you. And Representative Urdahl, I appreciate what the federal, state, and local is where we can work with our transportation investment. Appreciate your time, and we want to be a problem solver and be part of the solution. And feel free, anyone reach out to our office. We are all ears, and it's a privilege and a pleasure to serve. So thank you all for your time.
Right, I'd like to thank Congressman Stauber as well for the attitude that he has and the things that he's trying to do, working bipartisanly in Washington. I think that's an important factor in how you get things done. And I'd like to again thank the Transportation Alliance for the work that you do. Do feel free to contact me and any other legislator. I think you should never assume that we know anything as far as transportation is concerned, because you guys are the ones that are closest to this. If you assume that we know something, we just might not know nearly as much about it as you do. So it's important to fill us in on what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done. And hopefully we come up with a bonding bill that's going to address the greater needs of the people of Minnesota, because that's why we do bonding bills. It's to take care of what the state of Minnesota owns, what the people of Minnesota own. And whether it's a leaky roof or a bumpy road, if we own it, we should take care of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That was perfect. Thank you so much again, and we'll be in touch. And please have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see more progress next week. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And thanks to everybody who participated.